Up until now, the main consensus algorithm we focused on is proof of work. Proof of work, although the system behind the most popular cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, still has many drawbacks. For example, we have already mentioned the massive amount of energy consumption required for proof of work, the potential for 51% attacks, as well as the shift from decentralized individual miners to more centralized mining pools. To solve some of these issues, proof of stake was introduced. As mentioned earlier, proof of stake is a consensus mechanism where voting power is directly proportional to economic stake locked up in the network, instead of computational power and resources. Each participant stakes a certain amount of native currency, and each node is given a probability of being chosen as the next validator, weighted by how much was at stake. Once a validator is chosen, they can propose a valid block and receive a reward. With the scheme, how much power a participant has in the network is limited by the amounts they're willing to stake. Rather than relying on rewards for a security, proof of stake relies on penalties. If a participant places stake on a dishonest block, they are penalized and lose however much they put at stake. In this, acting maliciously is penalized much more heavily than the gain from acting honestly. This is one example of defender's advantage. Nodes are now disincentivized to act maliciously due to the explicit consequences of doing so. The security comes from locking up capitals for long periods of time. Proof of work, on the other hand, has no such defender's advantage. The cost of attacking and the cost of defending are one-to-one, meaning the amounts of resources I spend on acting honestly versus acting dishonestly are equal. There is no explicit disincentive against acting maliciously in proof of work. It simply allows it. Another advantage proof of stake has over proof of work is the drawback in attempting a 51% attack. In proof of work, a dishonest actor needs 51% of the network's hash power, and if achieved, can censor transactions, rewrite transaction history, and perform double spend attacks. Nodes are not explicitly discouraged from attempting a 51% attack, and, if unsuccessful, only lose the resources used to attempt the attack. This cannot be said for proof of stake, which requires 51% of the network's coins. This is incredibly expensive, and the attacker must stake all of their wealth in order to attempt executing the attack. Also, since this miner owns 51% of the cryptocurrency, it is not in their best interest to attack a network that they hold a majority share in if the value of the cryptocurrency were to drop due to the attack. As seen, there are major drawbacks in attempting this, another example of proof of stake's disincentive-focused system. Although proof of stake fixes many issues with proof of work, it is not without its drawbacks. For example, there is the problem of the rich get richer. Those with more wealth can stake more and increase their chances of creating the next block, and therefore receiving the award and increasing their wealth further. One implementation of proof of work is Ethereum's Casper protocol, which takes this to another step, which enforces a minimum stake value required to validate blocks. Some argue that this takes the issue to an extreme and makes the system much more centralized. However, only time will tell. Another issue of proof of work stems from the fact that amount of voting power is tied directly to how much stake one has. In proof of work, anyone can buy ASICs and begin participating in the network, but in proof of stake, all the voting power is internal to the system, so one can only obtain stake if a current stakeholder sells theirs. This means that if a single actor is able to obtain 51% of the cryptocurrency, there is no way for this power to be taken back by the rest of the network. In proof of work, dislodging 51% power would only require more computation through more honest mining, reducing the relative power of the malicious miner. However, in proof of stake, the only way to reduce this power is to decrease the relative amount of cryptocurrency the dishonest validator has. However, there is no way to do this without the 51% stakeholder willingly selling their stake. Proof of stake also introduces the liquidity problem. Since validators must lock up their funds in order to have a stake in the network, the actual amount of funds available for transactions is much lower. This reduces the liquidity of the cryptocurrency itself, decreases the amount of available funds, and increases price and demand. But because of this, validators are more incentivized to hold on to their funds and sell it when the prices increase, rather than participating in the network. One more issue is that someone can rewrite the history of the blockchain if someone with a huge share of stake sells their private keys. By obtaining such a large stake in the network, they change previous transactions on a different chain. Outside of these drawbacks of proof of stake that were mentioned, there are also specific attacks that can be conducted in a proof of stake system that will be covered in the next section.